Hello, my name's Sarah, and I'm going to give you some top-level tips that will help you to get the most out of using Discovery. From the National Archives homepage here, to get to Discovery, the easiest thing to do is click where it says Search the Catalogue. But just before we start, I want to say a bit about what Discovery is, because this will help you to understand how it works. So Discovery is made up of descriptions of records. So you need to search for words that you might find in the description rather than the content of a document. And secondly, Discovery is a collection of information about records held in more than 2,500 archives. So when you search, you might get results for things kept at the National Archives, but you might also find records kept in other places. So this is what we call the Discovery homepage. And over here, we have Discovery Help. And I'll be referring to this a few times during the webinar because there's useful information in there that I won't get the chance to cover today. Now you can see a few search boxes. The keyword search box is pretty self-explanatory really, but sometimes finding the right keywords to search with requires quite a bit of thought, and I'll say more about that as we go along. If you know the dates of the records you're looking for, then you can use these boxes to make sure that you don't get lots of records from the wrong dates that aren't relevant to you. Our collection covers 1,000 years, so even if you just know the right century, it can be helpful to put it here. But if you don't, there are still options to filter your results by date later on. Now here, on the right, if we leave this as it is, then we'll be searching descriptions of records held at all of those 2,500 archives that I mentioned. So if we use this drop-down menu on the right here, we can select to look at only results of records held at the National Archives or only results of records held in other archives, and that might be useful in some situations. But in this instance, we're just going to leave it as it is, and we're going to search records held in all archives. So let's try a search. I'm just going to do something fairly broad and non-specific. I'm just going to search for Yorkshire. You can see I've used a capital Y for Yorkshire, but you don't have to. It can be upper or lowercase. So I click on search. I'm going to delete that option to look at a tour. So you can see we've got a lot of results here, over 884,000. So we really want to reduce those. And there are some filtering options here on the left that we can look at. So first of all, just to point out, in this section here called Held By, it shows you out of those 884,000, how many records are held at the National Archives and how many are held in other archives. And it also mentions how many out of the records held at the National Archives are available to be downloaded. Now, the figure in this case is unusually high, and that's because our search for Yorkshire is going to produce lots of results from First World War records of regiments where Yorkshire is in the title of the regiment. So below the Held By filter, we've got dates. And for this example, we're going to choose a period. We're going to choose 1900 to 1924. And then if we click down here on Refine, you'll see that that will reduce the number of our results, and it's reduced it down to just under 335,000. Now what I want to do is select only the records held here at the National Archives. So we're going to lose the results for records held in other archives. And you can see there the number in the brackets, that's what we should reduce our results down to. So we'll click on that. And now that we've selected only the records held at the National Archives, we get some additional filtering options that open up. So you've got this one here called Collection, and below Collection there are 4 others. I'm going to look at the filtering options for Collection and the filtering options for Subjects, but I won't be covering the other 3 here. You can read about those in Discovery Help. So here, under Collection, you can see the results broken down by the different government departments that created the records. So we can use these filters to try and improve the relevance of our search results. And just to point out, these letter codes here next to the department names, these are the first part of what we call the document reference, and I'll be saying more about that later. So let's choose records here held by the War Office that will have the letter code WO. And you can see the number in brackets there, that's the number of results that we should get. So we select WO, scroll down and click on Refine. And you can see here, under the heading Your Filters, that the filters that we've chosen are shown, and we can delete any of them at any point just by clicking on these crosses or by using this Remove All Filters link here. And it's worth knowing that these are called sticky filters, and that's because if we were going to change our search term, let's say we changed Yorkshire to Lancashire and then just clicked again on search, these same filters that we've already selected would still apply, so they would still be restricting our search results in the same way. Okay, let's scroll down and look at the subjects filter. I'm just going to click on this option here to show all filters. At the moment, it's just showing the, I think, 10 most populated filters. So let's just click on Show All Filters, and you can see that some others open out. I'm going to click on the filter for diaries because what I want to get through to are First World War diaries that contain the word Yorkshire in the description. So let's click on diaries and then scroll down and click on Refine. So now the number of results that we've got, 135, a lot more manageable. We've chosen records from the National Archives, from the War Office, covering the subject of diaries for the period 1900 to 1924. And out of those 135 results, we can see here that 119 are downloadable. We're just going to have a quick look at the options we've got here at the top of the results page. So we're looking at the moment at what's called a detailed document description view. But using this option here where it says simple view, we can toggle to a view that has less information. You can see what that looks like there. So it might be quite useful to use the simple view if you want to scan through a number of pages of results quite quickly. But let's put it back into detailed view for now. If you want to print your page of search results, you can do that using this print option here. And if you click on export results, you can see that you have the option to export your results into a spreadsheet. And you can export all of your results, but only where there are less than 10,000. You might find it a helpful thing to export your results if you want to be able to search large amounts of data or to maybe sort out data or to store your search results, perhaps so you can keep a record of what you've looked at and so on. Now this option here, where at the moment it says relevant, we have a drop-down menu. If I click on this arrow, you'll see the options that appear. Relevance is really to do with how often records are searched for and where, or how often our search term, which is Yorkshire in this instance, how often that appears in the record descriptions. So these other options, when you open up the drop-down menu, show that you can sort your results by date or alphabetically by title or by the document reference number. And in this case, I'm going to sort it by the document reference. So now you can see the different order that these results are in. And this bit here is the reference, and it's this that the computer has now sorted everything by. You can see it starts with the letter code WO, and that's because we selected only records from the War Office, and they will all start with the letter code WO. That's a relatively logical letter code to have for War Office, and not all the letter codes for the departments are quite so obvious, but there you go, that's War Office. So War Office is followed here by 95. 95 is what's called the record series number. And the next number here, 128, is what we call the piece number. And the final number, 6, is what we call the item number. And there's more information about this sort of thing in Discovery Help if you want to find out more about how our record references are worked out. But just to say that most references for documents in the National Archives collections have those first 3 elements: a letter code, a series number, and a piece number. And then some also have the additional item number. And the reference number is the key identifier of a record. So if you know that reference number, you can always get back to the same record description by putting it in the Discovery search box. So when you find records that you think you might want to see again, make sure that you keep a note of that reference number. Okay, so on a screen of results like this, it can be helpful sometimes to just browse through some of the document descriptions and just sort of look at some of the ways that they're listed. So, for example, this one at the top here, you can see that the 16th Battalion of the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry is just written 16, so no TH for 16th. And then again on that one, you can see that in King's Own there's no apostrophe, but here in King's Own there is an apostrophe. So sometimes it's just useful to have a bit of a look and be aware of potential discrepancies like that, because when you're thinking about how to fine-tune your own searches, it can be useful to be aware of them. Okay, so let's see, for example, if we decided that we did want to just look at the war diaries for the 16th Battalion, instead of looking through all of our 135 results to see how many there are, we could just add 16 into the search bar. So we've got Yorkshire and then 16, and we click on search. And we've got 5 results. But what if we had put in 16th, thinking, well, it's the 16th Battalion, I'm going to put 16th. Click on search again, and we get no results. And that illustrates how Discovery, unfortunately, is not like Google. So if you put in 16th, it won't ask you if you actually just mean 16. So sometimes it's probably a good idea not to be too precise with your search terms unless you're really sure how a record is described. Okay, so let's take the TH out of there and click on search again. And now let's look at one of these documents in a little bit more detail. So if we click on the document title, which is this bit at the top, let's click on this one here. And we get through to what's called the document description page. You can see up at the top here the hierarchy of the record. It shows the piece and the series and so on that this record sits within. And this record is actually available to download. You can click on Add to Basket. It does show that there's a fee, but if you register, then you won't need to pay that fee. You can also see here that there's a way of looking at an example of a page from a war diary. Okay, so we're going to try a different kind of search now. We're going to go back to the Discovery homepage. I'm just going to click here to do that. And this is going to remove all of the filters that we had applied. So we're starting again from scratch. So let's say that you had an ancestor that worked in a shipyard, or perhaps you're interested in local history and there was a shipyard in your area. Let's do a search for shipyard. And click on search. Okay, so we've got just under 6,000 records. And if we look over here at the held by section, you can see that under 1,000 are at the National Archives and over 5,000 are in other archives. And why do you think that is? Well, records that come to the National Archives are from central government departments and the major courts of law. So records of local government and business are more likely to be found in local archives. So in this case, let's select other archives here and see what happens. And now, if we scroll down, you can see that we have a list of where those records are, which archives they are held in. So let's select one. Let's select Teesside Archives. That's got the most, and click on Refine. And now you can see again, we've got record descriptions, and we can browse through them and start to get a feel for the sorts of records that we could hope to find. There are inventories, publications, ledgers, things about apprentices, all sorts of things. And if we click on a document title, let's click on this one. Again, we're through to what's called the document description page, and you can see the hierarchy of this record, how it sits within its collection, and you can see the reference for this document, and you can see that it's a different format to the references that we have for the records in the National Archives' own collections. There's information about where the record is held, and you can click on this to get contact details. Okay, at this point, I want to go through a few different search techniques. So let's click on Discovery and go back to the main Discovery page again. So you can use something called a Boolean search, which is where you combine your search words with and, or not, in capital letters, and this gets you more relevant results. You can also use what we call wildcards, and you can use inverted commas in your searches. So, as an example, if we searched for oil painting, we get over 6,500 results. But some of these will be records where the words oil and painting are close to each other in the description, but not necessarily together, not necessarily oil followed immediately by painting. So if we put our search terms into inverted commas and search again, you can see that the number of results has gone down. And that's because we've only picked up results where the exact phrase oil painting is in the description. Another example, if we wanted to search for watercolours, but we didn't know whether it would be written as one word or two words, we could do a search like this. We could do watercolour or watercolour. This should bring up results that contain either watercolour as one word or watercolour as two words in our results list. And if we wanted to search again, let's say for painting, but we didn't want to get results that included oil painting this time, we could search for painting not oil. Okay. Now, a bit more of a complicated combination of some of these search techniques. If we wanted to search for watercolours again, but we wanted to add the word painting into the search, we could do painting and in capital letters, and then it starts to look a bit like algebra. We put in brackets watercolour in one word or watercolour, two words in inverted commas. And with this search, we're saying that we want to find record descriptions where painting and watercolour as one word are mentioned, or where painting and watercolour as two words are mentioned, and we want them all to come up in our search list together. If we had said watercolour and watercolour here, that would mean that we were searching for record descriptions where painting and both spellings of watercolour were mentioned in the same record description. There could be some of those, but that's probably not what we want. Okay, so another search technique. What if we were looking for a name, but we weren't sure what spelling might have been used? We can use an asterisk to substitute for one or more letters. So, for example, doing R-O-B asterisk N would pick up Robin if it was spelled R-O-B-I-N, or if it was spelled R-O-B-Y-N. It would also pick up R-O-B-B-I-N. And if we put an asterisk at the end as well, it would also pick up Robbins or Robinson. But if we used a question mark instead of an asterisk, like that, that substitutes for just one character. So it would only find R-O-B-I-N or R-O-B-Y-N. It wouldn't pick up something like R-O-B-B-I-N or Robbins, etc. So again, you can look in Discovery Help to find out a bit more about this kind of searching. Okay, so let's get back to the Discovery homepage again. And this time I'm going to talk you through using the advanced search option, and that's here. So you've already seen how you can do a simple search for Yorkshire and then use filters to bring your results down to more manageable numbers and find more relevant records. Using the advanced search is a way of applying the filters at the start of your search instead. The first thing to note here is that there are two tabs, Search for Records and Search for Record Creators, and I'm only going to be looking at this one for records. You can read about record creators in Discovery Help. So this top section here under the heading Search for Records has got a number of different fields that we can complete. Here where it says find all of these words, whatever we put into this search box, it will behave in the same way as the main search box on that Discovery homepage. So your results would include catalogue descriptions that have all of the keywords that you put into this box. So for example, you could search for, excuse my rubbish typing, transport police. And that gets just over 2,000 results. But it's going to include descriptions that contain transport and police, but not necessarily in that order or immediately next to each other, just like when we searched for oil painting previously. So instead, we could go back to our advanced search page and we could put transport police into the exact word or phrase box. And that's the same as putting it into inverted commas. And when we click on search, you'll see, in fact, that it turns up in the search box there in inverted commas. So it's searched for that exact phrase. And now we've got fewer results. So now let's go back to the advanced search page and take out that search. We'll try something different now. If you were searching for somebody's name and you used the all of these words box at the top there, let's say you were looking for Edward Thomas. Wait a minute. Again, you don't have to use capital letters. Oh, it's jumped to the wrong side of the screen. Let's do that again. Edward Thomas. So searching for Edward Thomas in this all of these words box, your results are going to include descriptions with the name Edward and the name Thomas, but they won't necessarily be together. So you could get records where there was a list of people and one was Edward something and the other was Thomas something. And you could get Edward Thomas Brown, and you could get Thomas Edward Smith. And if someone was listed as just E. Thomas, you might not pick them up at all. So that might be an instance where you could use an asterisk. For example, you could do E asterisk Thomas, but you just have to be aware you'd get all sorts of other names beginning with E, like Eric and Emma and so on. So what about if you put Edward Thomas into the exact word or phrase box, like that? Would that be a better option? Well, it could be. But the downfall with that would be that perhaps the name could have been spelled differently to how you're spelling it. There are often discrepancies between what you think is the right information and what was actually recorded in the documents. Names have sometimes been spelt differently over time, and sometimes perhaps the clerk that wrote down the name might have spelt it wrong, or when a document was transcribed, it could have been mistranscribed. And then perhaps you could search for Edward Thomas thinking that that was the right name, but it might be that in fact your ancestor's name was actually George Edward Thomas, but they just chose to use their middle name of Edward. So you might not find them if George Thomas or George Edward Thomas is how they've been recorded. Okay, so let's have a look at something else now. Sometimes your searching is going to be more effective if you can use a number of different keywords. So let's say that you were interested in US-China relations, because, I mean, who isn't? US-China relations. So let's do that search, and you can see we get 397 results. But what about records that might have used the term USA or United States or America in their description? What we can do is we can take US out of this top box here. So we've just got China relations there. And then in these boxes here where it says any of these words, we could put in US and America and USA, for example. So you can see we've increased the number of results there, but we could also have got some that aren't really relevant. We might have got some relating to Latin America and some relating here, you can see, to Indochina. So maybe we would like to eliminate those that relate to Indochina. If we go back to the advanced search page, we can use this option here where it says don't find words, and we can put Indo in there. We can also use wildcards in this kind of search. So let's say we take the A off the end of China and put on an asterisk. That will now pick up China and Chinese. And if we put an asterisk at the end of relations, that will also pick up relationship. And we could put an asterisk after America, and that would also pick up American. We could, I guess, also put an asterisk after US, but if we did that, we could also pick up things like USSR. So even though we would be looking for USA, we could also get a lot of results that were not really relevant. So you've just got to give it a go and maybe, have a bit of a think about what's going to be the best way to use this kind of function. Now, if you knew the letter code for the department that created the records you're interested in, or if you knew the record series number, you can also add that into your advanced search. So here, we could put a reference for a letter code or for a series into this box here. The best way of finding out what sort of information to use in these boxes is by using our research guides, and I'll talk a bit more about those in a minute. But if, for example, you had looked at the research guide on Foreign Office correspondence, it would tell you that there's a key series of records for political correspondence, which is called FO371. So let's just try putting FO371 in there and search again, and that's also going to change our results. Another thing we could do is add some dates. So down here we've got a date range. You can either just put in 1 year and say search a specific date, or you can put a range in. So let's say we went from 1945 to 1955 and click again on search. And so now we've got a really honed down set of search results. We've really reduced them down so that there's only 55. It's a much more refined set of results than what we did originally when we looked for US-China relations. But as I mentioned earlier, the general rule is that it's better to start with a broad keyword search with as few keywords as possible, and then refine your search after that using the filters. Okay, so if we just go back to the advanced search page, there are a couple more things that I can show you. If we scroll down, you see the section here, held by, and if we click on search the National Archives, you can see some more options that open up, and I'm just going to look at a couple of them. This first one here, that's called Records by Government Department Creators. This is a useful way to try and find the relevant letter code for a department. So, for example, if we type in security, you can see the departments that come up that have the word security in their title, and you can see the relevant letter codes for them. Another example might be defense, and you can see the same thing there. Below this, we have what's called taxonomy subjects, and I just want to point it out. You can look through this list of subjects and you can pick any that you think would be relevant and helpful to your search. Just click in the relevant box and then go back and click on search for the rest of your searching. But it's important to remember that there are still vast chunks of the National Archives records that just aren't described in a way that can be easily keyword searchable. So, for example, not all records that relate to individual people are described using those people's name. Sometimes the name might be in the content of a document, but not in the description. So a name search won't find them in a case like that. And the results for the keyword search that we did on Chinese-American relations, that's not going to pick up absolutely everything that we have on the subject. So if you can't find what you're looking for using Discovery, or if you're just unsure whether you've found everything that could be relevant, you could make use of our research guides. Okay, so to find the research guides, let's go back to the home page. And you can see this tab here called Help with Your Research. If I click on that, you can see that our research guides are grouped into categories. And at the top here, there's an A to Z index. Also over here, we've got a search box, and that's going to search the content of the research guides. It's not a search box for discovery. So in this example, I'm going to try and find a research guide about Royal Navy logbooks. And I could go to the A to Z index and click on L for logbooks or N for Navy, and then look through the list of research guides to find one about logbooks. Or I could use this search box and I could type in logbook and see what guides came up that mention logbooks. Or we could go to the military and maritime category, and that's the route that I'm going to take. So I click on that category and you can see that there are 110 research guides available. But we're going to refine our results using these options on the left. So we're going to click on just Royal Navy and Marines and click on Apply. So now we have 31 research guide titles, and they're listed in alphabetical order. You might need to just browse through these, but I happen to know in this case that I'm looking for a guide that starts with Royal Navy ships. There we go, Royal Navy ships logbooks. So if I click on the title of the guide, now the guide has a contents box which allows you to see which sections might be most relevant to your research. But I would recommend reading the whole guide from the start because you can learn details about how and why the records were created, how they're arranged and described in Discovery, and whether there are any reasons why you might struggle to find what you want. But for the purposes of this demonstration, let's jump to section 5. And you can see here that it says that logs for this period are in a record series called ADM 53, and we can consult the series description for information on what the records contain, and we can click on the series reference, which is this bit here, to search for ship's logs by name and date. So let's do that. So now we're in the record series description page. And you can see it's got a search box here and a date range search box as well. And if you scroll down, you can see information about the content of this series that could be really useful. So just bear in mind that that's there. But as it said in the research guide, we can search this series by ship's name. So let's say that we were looking for logbooks of a ship called Julia in 1916. We put Julia there and 1916, and then click on search. And you can see that we've got 2 results there. So that worked very well, but there are some record series that aren't quite so easy to search in this way. But again, if you use the research guides and read the series descriptions, you'll get more information that will help you to work out the best way to search. Okay, so let's have another look at a way to use Discovery. Let's go back to the main Discovery page. And this time, instead of searching, we're going to browse. So this is the browse option here. And you can see that in here, we've got different options. Over here, you can browse records of other archives, but we're just going to look at this option here, which is about browsing records of the National Archives. So let's say that we are interested in records from the Treasury. And if we read a research guide, we would know that the letter code for Treasury records is T. So let's click on T. I mean, as if you couldn't have guessed that, but anyway. Now, there are a number of letter codes beginning with T for different collections. You can see them here. But in this instance, the very first one says it's for Treasury, so that's the one we're interested in. So this is the description of the collection from the Treasury, and you can read it in full if you click on Details. But over here on the right, you can see that the collection is so large that it's actually split initially into divisions. So when we use browse, there are different things that we can do. There are different routes that we can take, but we end up at the same point. So for example, we could click on this description of the division here, or we could click on Details. And I'm just going to go with that. I'm going to click on Details. So this is the description of this particular division of the Treasury records. And you can see up here again, it shows that it's part of the wider collection of records from the Treasury. And to see what's in this division, we can click on here where it says Browse from here by hierarchy. And now we can see that within this division, we've got different record series. So this top one here is T161 and then T162. And if we wanted to see a bit more about what's in a particular record series, again, we could click on the description there, or we could click on details. I'm just going to click on details. And now we're through to the record series description for series T161. And again, you can see that there are keyword search options. But if we don't really know much about these treasury records and how they're arranged, it's going to be difficult to know what keywords to use. So really, we're just browsing at the moment. There are options, again, up here to browse by hierarchy or by reference. And we can search within or browse this series, as it says here. So let's click on browse there. And now we're looking at the individual pieces within that record series T161. And if we click on details of one of those pieces, again, we now find we're at the record description page where you can see the reference and the dates that it covers and so on. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. The key things to remember, I think, are don't be too specific with your search terms initially. Start with a broad search and then use the filters to narrow your results down. Or alternatively, you can use the advanced search option if you have a good idea of how to make your search more focused. But just be aware that you could be cutting out potentially useful results. And make good use of the research guides because they can save you time by directing you to the right areas to search in from the start.